The Abbey Shadows. The Abbey Shadows. Chapter 1. Homecoming. The North Sea wind bit at Eleanor Thorne's face as she stood at Whitby's harbour wall, watching waves crash against ancient stone. 15 years away hadn't changed the fundamental character of this place. The twin piers still embraced the harbour like protective arms. Fishing boats still bobbed in the gentle swell, and the imposing silhouette of the Abbey still dominated the east cliff, its broken arches reaching toward heaven like supplicant fingers. She'd sworn never to return, yet here she was. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Chief Inspector Malcolm Davies, her new superior. Again.
Thorne,
she answered, her voice clipped against the wind.
Where are you?
Davies demanded without preamble. The team's assembled.
getting reacquainted with my hometown. I'll be there in 10.
She ended the call before he could respond, taking one last look at the grey horizon. The tide was coming in, water climbing the harbour walls inch by relentless inch. Like memories, she thought. No matter how you tried to hold them back, they always found a way to return. Detective Inspector Eleanor Thorne, Ellie to the few who knew her well, had built her reputation solving impossible cases in London, the kind others gave up on, the kind that haunted you. When the offer came to head a major crimes unit in North Yorkshire covering her hometown of Whitby, she'd initially declined. She'd escaped this place once, but when the fourth request came with an unspoken understanding about the brewing storm in the seaside town, she'd reluctantly agreed. The police station sat back from the west side of town, a modern anomaly among Georgian and Victorian facades. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Ellie followed a young constable to the incident room. 6 faces turned to study her as she entered. Chief Inspector Davies, 50-something, with the weathered face of a lifelong coastal dweller, stood at the head of the table. To his right sat a woman with copper hair twisted into a severe knot. Beside her, a bald man with thick-rimmed glasses. Across from them, 3 younger officers waited expectantly.
D.I. Thorne?
Davies said, gesturing to an empty chair.
Welcome to Whitby CID. I wish circumstances were different.
He nodded to the redhead, who activated a projector. The image that appeared on the wall caused a momentary silence, the kind that fell when the human mind needed time to process horror. A woman lay at the bottom of the 199 steps that led to the Abbey. She wore a long white dress, arms arranged across her chest, auburn hair fanned around her pale face. Black stones covered her eyes, and her bare feet were positioned with unnatural precision.
Olivia Pearson, 34, local artist,
said the redhead, D.S. Karen Phillips, according to the nameplate before her.
Found by early morning tourists at 6:17 a.m. Initial assessment suggests she died between midnight and 4 a.m.
Cause of death?
Ellie asked, studying the image.
Pending full autopsy, but preliminary examination shows deep lacerations to the throat consistent with a sharp curved blade,
replied Phillips.
The stones covering her eyes are jet, locally sourced.
Any connection to the Martin and Booth cases?
Ellie asked. Surprise flickered across several faces. Davies' expression remained neutral.
You've done your homework,
he said.
Officially, Samuel Martin fell from the Abbey cliff path while intoxicated 10 months ago. Helena Booth drowned after falling from the West Pier during a storm 4 months ago.
And unofficially?
Unofficially,
Davies said, meeting her gaze.
That's why you're here.
Chapter 2. The 199 Steps. The 199 steps rose from Church Street towards St Mary's Churchyard and Whitby Abbey beyond, each worn stone representing centuries of pilgrims, mourners, and tourists who had made the climb. Now they were a crime scene. Ellie stood at the bottom, studying the precise spot where Olivia Pearson's body had been found hours earlier. The area had been processed, the body removed, but dark stains still marked the stones. Not just blood, Ellie noted, something darker, grittier.
Powder jet,
said a voice behind her.
Mixed with water to form a paste.
She turned to find D.S. Phillips approaching, case file in hand.
The lab confirmed it,
Phillips continued.
Same substance was found under the fingernails of both Martin and Booth, though in smaller quantities. We dismissed it initially. Whitby's jet industry means traces of it are everywhere.
Ellie nodded. Jet, the fossilized wood that had been Whitby's claim to fame since Victorian times, polished to a deep black shine and carved into jewelry and ornaments.
I need to see everything on the previous victims,
Ellie said, turning back to the steps.
and I want to talk to whoever found them.
Already arranged,
Phillips replied.
and the pathologist is waiting.
The morning fog had begun to lift as they made their way to St. Mary's churchyard, revealing glimpses of the Abbey's skeletal remains against the brightening sky. Gothic arches and broken walls, remnants of a structure that had once signified faith and permanence, now standing as monuments to inevitable decay. How fitting, Ellie thought, that death should occur in its shadow. Dr. Alan Cook's temporary mortuary occupied a sterile room in the hospital's basement. Olivia Pearson lay on a stainless steel table, her pale skin bluish under the harsh lights.
Arterial blood vessels in the throat were severed with surgical precision,
Cook said, gesturing to the wounds.
Single blade, curved, approximately 4 inches. Death would have been swift.
She was killed elsewhere and placed at the steps?
Ellie asked.
Almost certainly. Minimal blood at the scene despite catastrophic hemorrhaging.
Cook pointed to dark residue around the woman's eyes.
The jet paste was applied post-mortem, still wet when she was found. And there's this.
He gently turned the body, revealing the victim's back. Between her shoulder blades, carved with the same precision as the throat wound, was a symbol, a spiral inside a crescent moon.
The same mark was found on Martin and Booth?
Ellie asked.
Similar, but not identical.
Cook pulled up images on his tablet.
Martin's was a spiral inside a circle. Booth's was a spiral inside a square, meaning appears symbolic, but of what?
The phases of transformation.
Ellie murmured. Both Cook and Phillips looked at her questioningly.
Old alchemical symbols,
She explained.
circle for perfection, square for foundation, crescent for change, all containing the spiral of infinity.
You've encountered this before? Phillips asked.
No,
Ellie replied, eyes still on the carved symbol.
but I grew up surrounded by Whitby's myths. This town has a long memory for the occult.
As they left the morgue, Ellie felt the familiar weight of a case settling on her shoulders. 3 deaths, carefully staged, a pattern emerging. But patterns had beginning points, and she sensed they were already in the middle of something that had started long ago.
I need to see where she lived,
Ellie said as they stepped into the pale afternoon light.
and I want to know everything about her connection to Jet.
Chapter 3. Dark Polish. Olivia Pearson's studio occupied the top floor of a narrow building on Henrietta Street overlooking the harbour. Large windows flooded the space with northern light, illuminating workbenches cluttered with tools, sketches, and chunks of unpolished jet. The walls displayed both finished artwork and works in progress, delicate carvings of local landmarks, abstract pieces exploring shape and shadow, and several photographs of the Abbey at different times of day.
She was making a name for herself,
Phillips said, picking up a business card.
Olivia Pearson, jet artist and sculptor, had exhibitions in London and York last year.
Ellie moved slowly through the space, absorbing details. A half-finished carving sat in a vise, tools laid out neatly beside it, tea in a mug, long cold. An open sketchbook showing designs for what appeared to be jewelry pieces.
No signs of struggle.
She observed.
If she was taken from here, she either went willingly or was subdued quickly.
Neighbors report nothing unusual,
Phillips confirmed.
Last seen returning home around 7 p.m. the evening before her death.
Ellie paused at a corkboard covered with notes, sketches and photographs. Among them, a flyer for an exhibition. Whitby's Dark Reflection, new works by local artists. Scheduled to open in 2 weeks at the Whitby Museum.
Was she working with other artists?
She asked. Phillips consulted her notes.
Yes, collaborative exhibition. 5 artists total, all working with Jet or themes related to Whitby's history.
Ellie unpinned the flyer.
Martin and Booth, any connection to the art community?
Samuel Martin was a photographer, specialized in architectural shots of the Abbey and St. Mary's. Helena Booth worked at the museum, specifically with their Jet collection.
So, all 3 victims had connections to Whitby's jet industry and its artistic community.
Ellie said, mind racing.
Get me everything on the other artists in this exhibition. I want to know who they are, where they were when Pearson died, and any connection they might have had to our previous victims.
As they prepared to leave, Ellie noticed a small framed photograph partially hidden behind a stack of books. It showed a younger Olivia Pearson standing beside a tall man with intense eyes and angular features. They were on Whitby's West Pier, the lighthouse behind them, both smiling into the camera.
Who's this?
She asked, holding up the photo. Phillips squinted at it.
That's Marcus Harrow. Used to be local before making it big in forensic psychology. Consults for the Met now, I believe.
Ellie
Felt her chest tighten. Marcus Harrow, a name she hadn't allowed herself to think about in 15 years.
They knew each other?
Looks that way,
Phillips replied.
Want me to find out more about their connection?
Ellie placed the photograph in an evidence bag.
Yes, and contact Harrow. Tell him we need to talk.
Chapter 4. Tidal Pull. Ellie's temporary accommodation, a cottage overlooking the harbour, felt both foreign and achingly familiar. The landlady had mentioned it belonged to a London family who used it only in summer, leaving it pristine and impersonal. Perfect for someone who wanted to avoid memories. That evening, she spread case files across the dining table, creating a timeline of events. Samuel Martin, found broken on rocks below East Cliff. Helena Booth, discovered tangled in harbour chains after an apparent fall from the West Pier. Olivia Pearson, arranged at the bottom of the 199 steps. 3 deaths, each staged in iconic Whitby locations, each bearing the spiral mark and traces of jet. Her phone rang, an unknown number.
D.I. Thorne.
She answered. Ellie, a voice from the past, deeper now but unmistakable.
It's been a long time.
Marcus Harrow, her childhood friend, her first love, the last person to see her sister alive.
I'm calling about Olivia.
He continued when she didn't respond.
D.S. Phillips contacted me. I'm on my way to Whitby. I can help with the investigation.
How did you know Olivia Pearson?
Ellie asked, professional tone masking the turbulence beneath.
We were close once, and I've worked similar cases. Pattern killers with ritualistic elements.
When will you arrive?
Tomorrow morning. I'll come straight to the station.
After he hung up, Ellie stood at the window, watching darkness settle over Whitby Harbour. Lights reflected on black water, boats swaying with the tide's gentle rhythm. She'd escaped this place once, built a life and career far from its shadows. Now those shadows were pulling her back like the moon pulling the tide. She returned to her timeline, adding a new element. Lunar phases. Martin died on a new moon, Booth on a half moon, Pearson on a full moon. The pattern was clear and concerning. If the killer was following lunar cycles, they wouldn't wait another month for the next victim. The transformation wasn't complete. Chapter 5. Ghosts of the Past. The morning brought heavy fog shrouding Whitby in a grey embrace. As Ellie walked to the station, familiar landmarks appeared and disappeared in the mist. The whale jawbone arch on the west cliff, the harbour's edge, the shadowy outline of the Abbey. She was reviewing witness statements when a commotion in the outer office drew her attention. Marcus Harrow stood at the entrance, taller than she remembered, his dark hair now threaded with silver at the temples. He wore the confidence of success like a well-tailored coat. Their eyes met across the room and 15 years collapsed into nothing.
Dr. Harrow,
She said, extending her hand formally.
thank you for coming.
He hesitated before accepting the handshake.
Detective Inspector Thorne now. Congratulations.
Davies appeared, ushering them into the conference room where crime scene photos covered the walls. Marcus studied them intently, occasionally making notes.
The symbolism is deliberate.
He said finally. Each location has historical significance, the 199 steps where coffins were carried to, St. Mary's, the West Pier where sailors left for uncertain returns, the East Cliff where the Abbey watches over the town. The killer is creating a narrative about Whitby itself.
What about the carvings?
Ellie asked.
The phases of transformation?
Marcus nodded appreciatively.
You always did understand symbols. Yes, they're alchemical, representing stages of transformation. But they're also connected to Whitby's connection with jet, formed over millions of years from compressed wood, transformed by time and pressure into something dark and beautiful. So our killer sees these murders as transformative acts,
Davies summarized.
More than that,
Marcus replied.
they're creating art. The jet paste, the positioning, the locations. It's an exhibition. And like any exhibition, it's building toward something.
The museum opening.
Ellie said, the realization striking her.
The collaborative exhibition featuring local jet artists.
When?
Marcus asked.
10 days from now, new moon.
Marcus's expression darkened.
Then we don't have much time. Your killer is building to a finale.
After the briefing, Ellie and Marcus walked along the harbour wall, professional distance barely concealing the undercurrents between them.
Why didn't you tell me you were coming back to Whitby?
He asked.
It wasn't planned.
She replied.
The job came up. I took it.
After swearing you'd never set foot here again.
She stopped, turning to face him.
People said the same about you. Yet here you are, with connections to one of our victims.
Olivia and I dated briefly last year when I was consulting in York. It ended amicably.
His eyes searched hers.
This isn't about us, Ellie. It's about stopping whoever's doing this before they complete their pattern.
And what pattern is that exactly?
I don't know yet,
He admitted.
but it's connected to this place, to its history, to things that happened here.
The mist swirled around them, and for a moment, Ellie glimpsed the teenagers they had once been, standing on this same harbour wall, full of dreams and secrets.
Like what happened to Sarah.
She said quietly. Her sister's name hung between them, a ghost neither had been able to lay to rest.
Maybe,
He replied, his voice equally soft.
maybe it's time we finally faced that too.
Chapter 6. Beneath the Surface. The remaining artists from the exhibition gathered in the museum's small conference room, 3 people connected by their work with Jet, now bound by fear. Ellie studied them as introductions were made. Daniel Blackwood, a third-generation jet carver with calloused hands and wary eyes. Rebecca Chen, a contemporary jewellery designer who incorporated jet into modern pieces. And Finn Osborne, a conceptual artist whose installations explored Whitby's relationship with the stone.
We're investigating possible connections between Olivia Pearson's death and 2 previous cases.
Ellie began, watching their reactions carefully.
All 3 victims had connections to Whitby's jet industry.
You think we're in danger?
Rebecca said. It wasn't a question.
We think caution is warranted.
Ellie replied.
Did any of you notice changes in Olivia's behavior recently? New acquaintances, unusual interests?
The 3 exchanged glances before Daniel spoke. She'd become obsessed with old jet carving techniques, spent hours in the museum archives researching Victorian methods, said she was trying to recover lost knowledge.
What kind of knowledge?
Marcus asked from where he stood by the window.
Jet was more than decorative to the Victorians.
Finn explained.
It had spiritual associations, mourning jewelry, protective amulets. Olivia believed the old carvers embedded meanings in their designs, symbols that connected to Whitby's older traditions.
Pre-Christian traditions,
Rebecca added, her voice lowering.
She found references to jet being used in rituals dating back to the Roman occupation, protection against dark forces.
Ellie made notes, mind racing.
Did she share her research with anyone specific? Someone outside your group?
More glances exchanged. Then Finn reluctantly answered.
There's a man. Doesn't call himself a jet carver, but works with the material. Lives in one of the old fishermen's cottages on Henrietta Street. Nikolai Wade. Bit of a recluse, but Olivia said he knew things about traditional techniques that weren't in any books.
How well did you know Samuel Martin or Helena Booth?
Marcus asked.
Sam photographed our work for the exhibition catalog.
Daniel said.
Professional relationship mainly. Helena helped us access pieces from the museum's collection for research. She was especially helpful to Olivia.
After the interviews, Ellie and Marcus walked along Henrietta Street, narrow houses pressed close together on the cliffside, many now converted to shops and holiday rentals. At the far end, an unassuming cottage with darkened windows stood slightly apart from its neighbours.
Nikolai Wade,
Ellie said, checking the address.
no criminal record, moved to Whitby 8 years ago, sells work through specialty dealers, not local shops.
The door opened at Ellie's knock, revealing a tall man with prematurely white hair and intense pale eyes. His fingers were stained black, and the smell of heated jet wafted from inside.
Mr. Wade, D.I. Thorne, Whitby Police. This is Dr. Harrow, consulting on our investigation. We'd like to ask about your relationship with Olivia Pearson.
Wade studied them for a long moment before stepping back to allow entry.
You'd better come in. We have much to discuss.
The cottage's interior contrasted sharply with its modest exterior. Walls lined with bookshelves containing ancient-looking volumes, display cases filled with intricate jet carvings, and a workbench positioned to catch northern light.
You're investigating the deaths.
Wade said, gesturing them to sit.
Not accidents or random killings, but sacrifices.
Ellie tensed.
What makes you say that?
Because Olivia discovered the same pattern I did.
He replied, moving to a large map of Whitby pinned to one wall. Red markers dotted specific locations.
These deaths are recreating something much older. A ritual performed when Whitby faced darkness in the past.
What kind of ritual?
Marcus asked.
Protection through transformation,
Wade said, eyes gleaming with fervour.
Whitby has always been a threshold place. Between land and sea, between Christian and pagan traditions. In times of crisis, certain locations were used for rituals involving jet, believed to hold power against evil.
He pointed to 3 markers, East Cliff, West Pier, the 199 steps.
These aren't random locations. They form points of a protective triangle around the town, each representing an element: earth, water, air. The jet binds the sacrifice to the location, sealing its power.
And the spiral markings?
Ellie asked.
Symbols of transformation and binding,
Wade explained.
each different, each necessary for the complete ritual.
You seem to know a lot about these deaths, Mr. Wade.
Ellie said carefully.
Were you aware of these details before they were made public?
Wade smiled thinly.
I've been expecting them, Detective, just as Olivia was. She came to me with her research, and I confirmed what she suspected. Someone is using ancient knowledge for their own purpose. But they're making a crucial mistake.
Which is?
Marcus prompted.
The ritual requires the right sacrifices at the right times,
Wade said, turning back to his map.
but also the right person to complete it. Someone connected to Whitby by blood and loss. Someone who's experienced their own transformation here.
His pale eyes fixed on Ellie.
Someone like you, Detective, or perhaps your sister.
The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Ellie felt Marcus tense beside her.
My sister died 20 years ago,
She said, voice steady despite the shock.
What does Sarah have to do with this?
Everything.
Wade replied.
Her death was the first transformation, the beginning of what's happening now.
Chapter 7. Rising Tide. Ellie stood at the edge of Tate Hill Beach watching waves crash against the stone breakwater. This was where Sarah's body had washed ashore 20 years ago, after what the coroner had ruled an accidental drowning. 16-year-old Sarah Thorne, found with seaweed tangled in her hair and sand embedded under her fingernails. No evidence of foul play, just another tragedy claimed by the North Sea. Except, Ellie had never believed it was an accident.
I thought I'd find you here,
Marcus said, approaching from the harbour steps.
Wade's statement hit close to home.
How did he know about Sarah?
She asked without turning.
We didn't release victim names to the public back then. She was a minor.
Small town,
Marcus suggested.
Or he's done his research, old newspapers, local archives.
Or he knows something about her death.
Ellie finally faced him.
The way you do.
The accusation hung between them. Marcus had been the last person to see Sarah alive, a fact that had destroyed their relationship and driven Ellie from Whitby.
I told you everything I knew,
he said quietly.
We argued about her going to that party on the West Cliff. She ran off angry. I thought she'd gone home.
But she didn't,
Ellie replied, the familiar pain rising.
And the next morning, they found her here.
Before Marcus could respond, Ellie's phone rang, DS Phillips.
There's been a development,
Phillips said, her voice tight.
Rebecca Chen is missing. Didn't show up for a meeting at the museum this morning. Her flat shows signs of struggle, and there's jet paste on her bed sheets.
He's accelerating,
Ellie said, already moving toward the steps.
The pattern's changing. Where's Daniel Blackwood and Finn Osborne?
Blackwood's at the station giving a statement. Osborne's at his studio with an officer.
Keep them there, and get a team to Wade's cottage, I want, to know where he was last night. As they hurried back toward town, Marcus matched her stride.
This doesn't fit the lunar pattern. If Wade is right about the ritual.
I don't care about Wade's theories.
Ellie cut in.
I care about finding Rebecca Chen before she ends up like Olivia Pearson.
But as they reached the top of the harbour steps, Ellie's phone rang again. Chief Inspector Davies, his voice grim.
We've found her. Tate Hill Beach. You need to see this.
Rebecca Chen lay on the wet sand where the tide had just receded, arranged with the same careful precision as the previous victims. She wore a black dress, stark against the pale sand, with jet stones placed on her eyes and in her open mouth. The spiral mark carved between her shoulder blades contained a diamond shape.
Fourth phase of transformation,
Marcus murmured, crouching beside the body.
Diamond represents crystallization, the moment of becoming.
Time of death?
Ellie asked the forensic technician.
Based on body temperature and rigor between midnight and 2 a.m.,
Came the reply.
Tide would have covered this area until about an hour ago.
Ellie looked up at the cliff face looming above, the 199 steps visible in the distance, the Abbey's silhouette stark against the morning sky. 4 points now, not 3. A square, not a triangle.
He's creating a boundary,
She realized.
a perimeter around the old town.
These locations,
Marcus said, pointing to each.
East Cliff, West Pier, the steps, and now here. They're the traditional boundaries of Old Whitby before expansion. The oldest part of town centered on
St. Mary's Churchyard,
Ellie finished.
where 5 pathways meet.
Their eyes met in shared understanding.
the center point,
Marcus said.
where the ritual would complete.
The museum exhibition.
Ellie said, already pulling out her phone.
It opens tomorrow night. Davies, I need officers at the museum immediately, and find Nikolai Wade.
But as units were dispatched, word came back that Wade's cottage stood empty, work tools abandoned mid-project. He had vanished, leaving behind only a single carved piece on his workbench, a perfect jet replica of Whitby Abbey, complete with its broken arches reaching toward heaven. Chapter 8. Darkness Falls. The storm rolled in from the North Sea that evening, black clouds massing on the horizon before engulfing Whitby in wind-driven rain. By nightfall, the power was out across most of the old town, emergency generators providing the only light at the police station.
Still no sign of Wade,
Phillips reported, shaking rain from her coat.
Harbor Patrol reports no boats missing. Train station has no record of him leaving. Road checkpoints are in place, but visibility's almost zero.
What about Blackwood and Osborne?
Ellie asked.
Secure locations, officers with both. Museums locked down, exhibition hall under guard.
Davies entered, followed by a tech carrying a laptop.
You need to see this. Came in through the station's general email 20 minutes ago.
The video showed a dimly lit stone chamber, walls glistening with moisture. In the centre stood a jet carving of Whitby Abbey, identical to the one found in Wade's cottage, surrounded by candles. A figure moved at the edge of the frame, face obscured.
My dear detective,
A voice said, Wade's voice, but altered, deeper.
by now you understand what's happening. The cleansing has begun. 4 points sealed, 1 heart to bind. The ritual requires completion at the center, where all paths meet as the new moon brings darkness.
The camera panned to reveal a figure lying on a stone slab. Nikolai Wade himself, pale and still, spiral markings carved into his chest.
He wasn't the killer.
Marcus said quietly. He was being used. The 5th sacrifice must be willing, the voice continued. The one who began must end it. You know where to find me? Eleanor Thorne. You've always known. Since that night 20 years ago when your sister made her choice. The video ended with a final image. The interior of St. Mary's Church, altar illuminated by candles, the timestamp showing it had been recorded less than an hour ago. It's a trap, Davies warned as Ellie grabbed her coat. Of course it is, she replied, but whoever this is has been killing people to draw me here. I'm not risking anyone else. You're not going alone, Marcus insisted, already following her. Outside, the storm had intensified, rain lashing horizontally and wind howling through the narrow streets. The power outage had plunged Whitby into near-total darkness, with only occasional emergency lights marking their path up toward the churchyard. The centre where 5 paths meet, Marcus shouted over the wind as they struggled up the 199 steps. It's not just geographical, it's symbolic. 5 elements, 5 sacrifices, 5 phases of transformation. This isn't about ancient rituals, Ellie replied, fighting against the gale. This is personal. They mentioned Sarah. They've been planning this for years. As they reached the top of the steps, St. Mary's churchyard opened before them, gravestones glistening in the rain. The church itself stood dark except for a faint glow from the windows, suggesting candlelight within. Ellie drew her weapon. Stay behind me. Whoever's in there knows you, Marcus reminded her. Knows your past, your connection to this place. Don't underestimate what they're capable of. The church door creaked open at Ellie's touch, revealing the nave illuminated by dozens of candles. The air smelled of beeswax, incense, and something sharper, heated jet. At the altar stood a figure in a hooded cloak, back turned toward them. Police! Ellie called, weapon raised. Show your hands and turn around slowly. I've been waiting for you, Ellie, said a voice that stopped her cold, familiar yet impossible. For 20 years I've been preparing for this moment. The figure turned, lowering the hood to reveal a woman's face, older, scarred along one cheek but unmistakable. Sarah, her sister, alive. That's not possible, Ellie whispered, gun wavering. You died. I identified your body. Sarah smiled, a cold expression that never reached her eyes. Did you? Or did you see what you expected to see? A drowned girl with my necklace, my clothes, but not me. This is what she wants, Marcus warned, his voice shaking. To destabilize you, make you doubt yourself. Hello, Marcus, Sarah said, turning her gaze to him. Still trying to protect my sister, after what you did. Sarah died, Marcus insisted. I watched them pull her body from the water. You watched them pull a body from the water, Sarah corrected. A girl so broken by the rocks and sea that only her sister could identify her. So convenient. Ellie's mind raced, memories surfacing, the closed casket funeral, Her parents' insistence on quick cremation, the lingering doubt she'd buried beneath grief and determination. "If you're really Sarah, where have you been for 20 years?" she demanded. "Becoming," Sarah replied, gesturing to the altar behind her where 5 jet carvings stood in a circle, a spiral, a circle, a square, a diamond, and at the center a pentagram. "Learning the true history of this place. What happened here centuries ago? What must happen now?" "The killings," Ellie said. "Martin, Booth, Pearson, Chen, Wade, you murdered them all." "I transformed them," Sarah corrected. "Each one had a role to play, a connection to the pattern. Just as you do, Ellie." The final piece. She stepped forward, and in the candlelight, Ellie saw what she'd missed before. The jet pendant around Sarah's neck, identical to one their mother had given Sarah on her 16th birthday. The pendant Ellie had identified on the drowned girl's body. "This ends now," Ellie said, steadying her weapon. "Sarah, or whoever you are, you're under arrest." Sarah laughed, the sound echoing in the vaulted ceiling. "It's already done, sister. The boundaries are sealed, the center awaits, and now the truth you've been running from for 20 years. She turned to Marcus. "Tell her, Marcus. Tell her what really happened that night." Chapter 9. Revelation. The storm raged outside, thunder crashing as if the heavens themselves responded to the tension within the church. Ellie kept her weapon trained on Sarah, but her eyes flicked to Marcus. "What is she talking about?" she demanded. "What truth?" Marcus's face had gone ashen. "She's manipulating you, Ellie. This isn't Sarah. It can't be." "Tell her," Sarah insisted, "about the ritual you interrupted. The one you found us performing in the Abbey ruins that night. The one that would have protected Whitby." "There was no ritual," Marcus protested. "Sarah and I argued about a party. She ran off." "Lies," Sarah spat. "We were 5 friends who discovered Whitby's secret, the protective boundary that kept darkness at bay for centuries. The ritual that needed renewing when the signs appeared." She moved toward a table beside the altar where an ancient book lay open, pages yellowed with age. The signs were there. Fish dying in strange patterns, unexplained disappearances, the erosion accelerating, the boundary was failing. "So you decided to perform some pagan ritual?" Ellie asked incredulously. "We weren't the first," Sarah replied. "Every generation, when needed, 5 would be chosen to renew the boundary. But Marcus found us at the Abbey that night. He didn't understand what he was witnessing, thought we were in danger." "Because you had a girl tied to the altar," Marcus burst out, then froze as the admission escaped him. Ellie stared at him. "What?" "It wasn't what it looked like," he said desperately. "I found Sarah and 4 others in the Abbey ruins. They had candles, symbols drawn on the ground, and a girl." "They had a girl on a makeshift altar," Marcus continued, voice hollow with the weight of long-buried memories. "Bound with ropes. She was drugged or unconscious. I thought it was some kind of assault. I tried to stop it. You interrupted a sacred moment," Sarah hissed. "The willing sacrifice that would have completed the boundary." "Willing?" Ellie echoed. "She was unconscious, Sarah." "She drank the preparation willingly. She understood what was required," Sarah insisted. "Marina Pearson volunteered to be the vessel." "Pearson?" Ellie's mind raced. "Olivia's mother?" Sarah smiled coldly. "Yes. Marina disappeared that night, didn't she, Marcus? When you attacked us, freed her, and in the chaos that followed." "There was a struggle," Marcus said, eyes fixed on a distant point, as if watching the scene unfold again. "Someone pushed Marina. Or she fell. Over the cliff edge. I tried to grab her, but..." His voice broke. "Then everyone scattered. I thought Sarah ran toward town. I went to call for help. And I followed Marina," Sarah said, "down to the rocks where she lay broken but still breathing. She begged me to complete the ritual. With her last breath, she extracted a promise that I would find a way to finish what we started." "But the body," Ellie pressed, "the body I identified as you." "Marina," Sarah replied simply. Similar height, similar build. By the time the tide brought her in, the sea had done its work, and I had taken her clothes, her identity markers, disappeared into the night to learn what I needed to know. Lightning flashed, illuminating the stained glass windows in stark relief. In that moment, Ellie saw something shift in Sarah's expression, a flicker of something desperate, almost pleading. For 20 years, Sarah continued, I've prepared. Learning the old ways, gathering the knowledge Marina and the others only partially understood. The ritual requires 5 sacrifices at the boundary points and a final transformation at the center. You killed innocent people, Ellie said, keeping her weapon steady. Not innocent, Sarah countered. Connected. Each one descended from those who maintained the boundary before, each one carrying the mark in their blood, whether they knew it or not. Olivia, Marina's daughter. Samuel, from the family that once guarded the East Cliff. Helena, whose ancestors watched the harbour. Rebecca, whose family crafted protective amulets for generations. And Wade, Marcus asked, a seeker who found too much truth. He recognized what was happening but misunderstood his role. He thought he was the one to complete the ritual. Sarah's laugh was brittle. He didn't have the bloodline. But I do, Ellie realized. That's why you've orchestrated all this, to bring me here. Sarah stepped forward, hands outstretched. The Thorne family has guarded the center point for centuries, Ellie. Our grandmother knew. Our mother knew. I was supposed to take up the mantle, but when that night went wrong... She gestured around the church. The darkness is coming. You've felt it your whole life. The pull back to Whitby, the sense of something unfinished, the cases you choose, the patterns you see that others don't. You were born for this moment. Born to help you murder more people? I don't think so. Ellie tightened her grip on her weapon. It's over, Sarah. Whatever game you're playing ends now. It's not a game. Sarah's composure cracked, desperation bleeding through. Look outside, Ellie. The storm isn't natural. The sea is rising higher than any tide should allow. The cliff is crumbling faster each year. These are the signs. As if in response, a tremendous crash sounded outside, the unmistakable rumble of stone giving way. Cliff collapse, Marcus said, moving to a window. The storm's undermining the east cliff near the Abbey. It's beginning, Sarah whispered. The boundary is failing completely. Without the ritual, Whitby will be lost. Not just the buildings, the souls, the darkness that sleeps beneath will wake. Ellie's radio crackled to life, Davy's voice barely audible through static. Thorne! Massive structural failure at East Cliff. Abbey's starting to go. We're evacuating the harbour area. Where are you? Before she could respond, the church floor trembled beneath them, ancient stones groaning, candles toppled, plunging sections of the nave into darkness. You have to believe me, Sarah pleaded, genuine fear now visible in her eyes. This isn't about me anymore. It's about saving what can be saved. By killing more people? Ellie demanded. No more deaths, Sarah said. The boundary points are sealed. All that remains is the center, the willing transformation. My transformation. She reached into her cloak, withdrawing a curved blade that gleamed in the remaining candlelight. I've always been the final sacrifice, Ellie. You're here to witness, to remember, to continue the protection afterward. Sarah? Marcus stepped forward but froze as Sarah raised the blade to her own throat. The ritual requires blood, freely given at the center point, Sarah said, voice suddenly calm. I've prepared for this moment my entire life. The jet will absorb the sacrifice, complete the boundary. Put the knife down, Ellie ordered, moving closer. Whatever you believe is happening, this isn't the answer. There is no other answer, Sarah replied sadly. Some patterns can't be broken, only completed. She stepped back toward the altar. I'm sorry I left you, Ellie. I'm sorry for the pain you've carried. But tonight, it ends, one way or another. Chapter 10. The Center Where 5 Paths Meet. Another violent tremor shook the church, more powerful than the last. Dust and small fragments of stone rained from the ceiling. Outside, the wind had reached a fevered pitch, howling through gaps in the ancient masonry like souls in torment. "The knife," Ellie said, extending her hand. "Give it to me, Sarah." "You still don't believe," Sarah replied, backing toward the altar. "Even now, with the evidence all around you." Marcus had circled to Ellie's right, creating a flanking position. "Think about what you're doing. If you really are Sarah Thorne, you have a life to reclaim. Family who mourned you." "The Sarah they knew died that night," she replied. "I became something else. A vessel. A guardian." Her eyes fixed on Ellie. "But I watched you. All these years, I tracked your career, your cases, the patterns you followed. You've been preparing too, in your own way." Another crash from outside, closer this time. The radio crackled with urgent voices reporting further cliff collapses flooding in the lower town. "Time is running out," Sarah insisted. "The boundary must be sealed now, or Whitby falls." Ellie studied. Her sister's face, the scar along her cheek, the haunted look in eyes that nevertheless resembled her own. There was madness there, certainly, but also absolute conviction. "If I were to believe you," Ellie said carefully, "if this ritual is real, there must be another way. The sacrifice doesn't have to be blood." Sarah's expression flickered with uncertainty. "The texts are clear. The final offering must be life freely given. The texts were written by people, Sarah. People interpret, people adapt." Ellie took another step forward. "You said I was born for this, that our family has guarded this place for generations. So let me find another way." For a moment, Sarah seemed to waver, the knife lowering slightly. Then her eyes hardened again. "There is no other way. The pattern must be completed as it was designed." She raised the blade again. "I'm sorry, Ellie." As Sarah pressed the blade to her throat, Ellie lunged forward, tackling her sister to the ground. The knife clattered across the stone floor as they struggled, Sarah fighting with unexpected strength. "You'll doom us all," Sarah cried, trying to throw Ellie off. "The center must be sealed." Marcus rushed to help restrain Sarah, but as he reached them, the most violent tremor yet shook the building. A massive section of the ceiling gave way, stones plummeting toward them. Marcus shoved both women aside, taking the brunt of the collapse. He cried out as stonework pinned his legs to the floor. "Marcus!" Ellie scrambled toward him, but Sarah was faster, darting toward the fallen knife. "It ends now," Sarah declared, returning to the altar. She slashed her palm, letting blood drip onto the 5 jet carvings arranged in their pattern. "With blood of the Guardian, freely given, I seal the center point." The effect was immediate and inexplicable. The church fell suddenly, eerily silent, the storm outside seeming to pause mid-fury. Sarah's blood ran in thin channels across the altar, tracing patterns that shouldn't have been possible on a level surface. Then came the light, not from above but from below, a deep blue glow emanating from the church floor itself, revealing ancient symbols etched into the stones, invisible until this moment. The patterns spread outward from the altar in 5 distinct lines, running along the floor toward different exits of the church. "The 5 paths," Sarah whispered, her face illuminated by the unearthly light. "Just as it was always meant to be." Outside, the storm's character changed, still violent but somehow different, as if fighting against itself rather than the land. "What have you done?" Ellie demanded, kneeling beside Marcus, who lay pale with pain. "What was necessary?" Sarah replied, swaying slightly. "A partial offering. It will hold the boundary for now, but not forever." She pressed her bleeding hand against the central jet carving, the pentagram. "The full ritual remains incomplete." As the blue light reached the church's doorways, a shockwave seemed to pulse outward. Through the windows, Ellie could see the light racing along the ground toward the cliff edge, the harbour, the 199 steps, and Tate Hill Beach, connecting the points where the bodies had been found. "My God!" Marcus gasped, staring at the phenomenon. It's real. The radio on Ellie's belt crackled. To life, Davis's voice cutting through static. Thorn. Whatever's happening, the storm's subsiding. Cliff collapse has stopped. Do you copy? Sarah smiled weakly, blood still flowing from her palm. It's working. The boundary is reforming. Ellie looked between her sister and the man who had once been everything to her, now injured trying to protect them both. The blue light pulsed again, illuminating Sarah's face, and Ellie finally saw the toll these years had taken. Beneath the confidence and conviction lay exhaustion and pain, so profound it transcended the physical. All these deaths, Ellie said quietly, all this manipulation and pain, there had to be another way. Perhaps, Sarah admitted, her strength visibly fading. But I could only work with what I knew, what I learned. The old knowledge is fragmented, imperfect. She looked directly at Ellie. That's why you're here. To find the better way next time. Next time. The boundary will hold for a generation, perhaps less. When the signs appear again, someone must recognize them. Someone must remember. Sarah slumped against the altar, her blood-soaked hand leaving a print on the ancient wood. The blue light began to fade, pulsing more weakly with each moment. Ellie moved to her sister, catching her as she fell. I'm calling for medical help. Too late for that, Sarah murmured. The offering was accepted. What's given cannot be reclaimed. I won't let you die, Ellie insisted, pressing her jacket against the wound which seemed to bleed far more profusely than a simple cut should. Sarah's eyes focused on her with sudden clarity. Listen carefully. The knowledge is in the Abbey ruins, hidden in the north transept, beneath the fallen arch. Everything I've learned, everything you'll need. Her good hand gripped Ellie's arm with surprising strength. You're the guardian now, whether you accept it or not. The patterns will call to you. The boundaries will speak to you. Sarah, stay with me, Ellie pleaded, the reality of finding and losing her sister in the same night overwhelming her professional detachment. I've missed you, Sarah whispered, her grip loosening. I'm sorry for what I had to become. As Sarah's eyes closed, the last of the blue light faded, leaving only the few remaining candles to illuminate the scene. Outside, the storm had diminished to a normal winter gale, the unnatural fury gone as quickly as it had appeared. Ellie held her sister as emergency services finally arrived, medical personnel rushing to Marcus first, then to Sarah's still form. The paramedics worked frantically, but Ellie already knew. The offering had been accepted. What was given could not be reclaimed. Chapter 11. Aftermath. 3 days later, Whitby began the process of recovery. The storm damage, while significant, had proven far less catastrophic than initially feared. The East Cliff collapse had miraculously stopped short of destroying the Abbey's main structure. The flooding in the lower town receded quickly, leaving mud and debris but few structural damages. Locals spoke of miraculous escapes, of how the worst of the storm seemed to pass around rather than through the old town's centre. Ellie stood in St. Mary's churchyard, gazing out over the town toward the sea beyond. The morning was clear, the water calm, belying the violence of days before. Behind her, the church showed few external signs of the events that had transpired within. A temporary covering over damaged sections of roof, a small area cordoned off for structural assessment. Thought I'd find you here, Davies said, approaching with 2 paper cups of coffee. He handed one to Ellie. How's Dr. Harrow? Recovering, she replied. Broken tibia, some internal bruising. They're transferring him to York tomorrow. Davies nodded, looking out toward the Abbey. The forensic reports came back on your sister. DNA confirms it. Sarah Thorne, missing presumed dead for 20 years. And the others? The victims? Exactly as you documented. All killed with the same curved blade found in the church. All with the symbolic carvings, the jet markings. He sipped his coffee. The official report will state Sarah Thorne suffered a psychotic break 20 years ago, assumed a new identity, then returned to Whitby to enact a delusional ritual she believed would protect the town. And the unofficial version? Ellie asked quietly. Davies was silent for a long moment. I've lived in Whitby my entire life, Detective Inspector. I've seen things on this coastline that defy explanation. Lights where no lights should be. Patterns in tide and stone that seem almost intentional. He turned to face her directly. I don't know what happened in that church. I don't know what your sister believed or what she did. But I know this town feels different now. Settled somehow. He didn't wait for her response, simply nodded and walked back toward the steps, leaving Ellie alone with her thoughts. After he'd gone, she turned toward the Abbey ruins, the north transept beneath the fallen arch. Sarah's final directions echoed in her mind. The ruins were still closed to the public due to safety concerns following the storm, but her police identification granted her access. The north transept lay partially collapsed, stones scattered where they had fallen centuries ago, now shifted slightly by the recent tremors. The fallen arch was obvious, a massive curved stone lying across smaller rubble. It took Ellie nearly an hour of careful searching before she found it. A loose stone beneath the arch that shifted under pressure. Beneath it lay a small cavity and within, a waterproof container. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Sarah's meticulous handwriting. Diagrams of Whitby with locations marked, historical accounts dating back centuries, genealogies of local families, including detailed notes on the Thorne lineage, and, most disturbing, accurate predictions of events that had come to pass since Sarah's disappearance, including weather patterns, erosion rates, and seemingly unconnected deaths. The final entry, dated just days before Olivia Pearson's murder, read simply, "The signs align. The boundary weakens. I've found the 5. And Ellie is coming home. The circle completes." Ellie closed the journal, a chill running through her despite the morning sun. She thought of Marcus, recovering in his hospital bed, who had looked at her with new eyes since that night. Half fear, half wonder. "You felt it too," he'd said when she visited. The moment the light spread through the church, something responded to what Sarah did. She had neither confirmed nor denied it. How could she explain the sensation that had coursed through her as the blue light touched her skin? The sudden awareness of Whitby, not as streets and buildings, but as something alive, something ancient, something that recognized her in return? As Ellie descended the 199 steps, with the journal secured inside her coat, she paused at the spot where Olivia Pearson's body had been found. From this vantage point, she could see all the locations in Sarah's pattern: the East Cliff, the West Pier, Tate Hill Beach, and St. Mary's above. 5 points forming a boundary around the old town. Her phone rang. Davies again. "You need to see this," he said without preamble. "The cliff face where the collapse occurred. There's something emerging from the stone." 20 minutes later, Ellie stood with Davies and a local geologist, staring at a section of newly exposed cliff face. Embedded in the stone were fossilized remains, not unusual for this coastline, rich in ammonites and other ancient life. But these weren't typical fossils. "I've never seen anything like it," the geologist admitted. "The pattern isn't random, and the material..." He handed Ellie a small fragment that had broken free. "It's jet, but formed in a way that shouldn't be possible." The fragment showed part of a larger symbol, a spiral within a larger design that couldn't be determined from this piece alone. But Ellie recognized it immediately from Sarah's journal, the boundary marker buried in the cliff face millennia ago. "When will the full excavation begin?" she asked, pocketing the fragment before the geologist could object. "That's just it," Davies replied. "The council's decided to stabilize and cover this section immediately. Safety concerns." Their eyes met, and Ellie saw the unspoken understanding. Some things were meant to remain hidden. That evening, as sunset painted Whitby Abbey in golden light, Ellie sat on a bench in St. Mary's churchyard with Sarah's journal open in her lap. The final pages contained not predictions but instructions, detailed protocols for monitoring the boundary, recognizing weakening signs, and, if necessary, the proper way to strengthen it without blood sacrifice. There is another way, Sarah had written. I believe it exists. The oldest texts hint at binding through devotion rather than death. Find it, Ellie. Succeed where I failed. As darkness fell over Whitby, Ellie made her decision. She would not leave as planned. The Metropolitan Police would have to accept her transfer request to remain in North Yorkshire permanently. Some patterns once recognised couldn't be unseen. Some responsibilities once understood couldn't be abandoned. In the harbour below, fishing boats prepared for their night's work, lights twinkling on the dark water. The tide was coming in, waves washing against the stone walls in their ancient rhythm. Ellie closed the journal and rose, feeling the weight of it in her hand, the weight of knowledge, of legacy, of the boundary she now understood she had always been meant to guard. Whitby slept peacefully beneath the stars, unaware of how close it had come to something beyond understanding, or of the woman who now watched over it with new eyes, the guardian at the centre where 5 paths meet. The end.